Hey guys, this is VaulSC. I hope that you are having a good week. In this video, I'm going to talk to you about a brand new custom mission designed by me, and it is called Neural Net. And of course, I'm going to go through the entire explanation and commentary, but if you just want to skip to the good stuff, feel free to just go straight to the two links in the video description. The first one will go to a Google Drive document, which we can see here, where you can read the rules. Just a two-page, easy to understand document. And the other link will take you to the Steam Workshop, which you've probably already subscribed to. It's the VaulSC Competitive Infinity Maps. If you look in the big black chest, there'll be one brand new map called Neural Net, which of course you can bring into TTS, and you can drag and drop it into the map thingy down here, and it will create this map here, which we're going to be talking about in the video as an example. So I've pre-prepared a nice simple little map which you can use to test this mission if you want and give feedback. Next time I run a league, I will probably use this mission unless we obviously uncover things about it that are really problematic, but I'm really liking it so far, and I think that you guys will really like it as well. So let's talk about this mission and what it's all about. So Neural Net is inspired by the classic comm center mission, which used to be a thing back in the day. It was a mission that had the grid of objectives, and basically the whole idea of the mission was to capture more of them than your opponent by the end of the game. So it was your typical quintessential button pressing mission. In recent times, Corvus Belli have taken that out, and I think it's just because there's that added burden for tournament organizers and people playing in TTS to bring lots of objective markers into their events and having to rearrange the table to accommodate the additional objectives if you have it later into the weekend. But some people do miss this style of mission, because when you have a lot of button pressing going on, it means that you're playing a real game of Infinity. There are tasks to complete that do not relate to just flat out destroying your opponent, but of course you have to control the table, and to do that you have to do some killing and destroying of your opponent anyway, so you have the best of both worlds and you're getting a bit more of a dynamic experience. What I'm going to be doing in this mission is bringing back the part of that I like, and toning down some of the problems that we had with flat-out button-pressing missions, which basically are that you can really avoid your opponent and just bang them up a little bit in the early game if you want to, but mainly go for the objective grabbing later in the game. And we'll see a couple of mechanics here which basically throw a spanner in the works and make that a little bit different. So let's go to the main objectives. There are two easy to understand ways of getting objective points here. Even a child can understand this. It says, control AI terminals, they are the objectives. At the end of the game, one objective point per controlled terminal. And if you have more of them at the end of the game, you have one bonus point. So let's look at this map we created. I'm going to go up here and make myself the red player, and we're going to imagine my opponent is the blue player. So let's say I move my guys up to the objectives. It's just a willpower check to control it. So you capture it that way, and then it's under my control that it's red. And then I grab this one as well. That one's red. And I grab this one as well, and that one is red. And then in my opponent's phase of the game, maybe they grab this one, and maybe they grab this one, so they have two objective points. Obviously, I'm winning 3 points to 2. Then later in the game, there's a bit more fighting, and I grab this one. And then in the final part of the game, my opponent actually grabs this one off me, because you can obviously capture somebody else's one and swing it back. And then they grab this one here as well, and that's blue. And then the game ends. So my opponent has 4 of those AI terminal console thingies. So they have 4 objective points. I have 3 red ones because they're controlled and captured on my side. So it's 4-3 to my opponent, but my opponent gets 1 bonus point for having more of them, because 4 is more than 3. So this is a win to the blue player, 5 objective points to 3. And, it couldn't be simpler than that. Easy scoring. There are no classified objectives and no HVTs deployed. Most people that I talk to don't particularly like classified objectives. They are kind of added noise and an additional layer of luck in the game. And HVTs are something that people often forget anyway, so this is a nice simple mission that do not involve them in any way. This is a typical standard deployment, 12 inches deep. So you throw on the grid, obviously, and you have obviously 3 squares worth of deployment zone right here, and your opponent has something similar on their side. The other restriction is that you can't deploy your guys right next to the objectives. So if we just get out some sample troops here, the screen will lag a bit while it loads them up, but we'll get this nice looking Caliban. So if I want to deploy my Caliban over here behind this wall, I can do that. Let's make this a bit smaller. But one thing I can't do is just deploy next to this. The objectives count as Silhouette 3 for purposes of terrain and line of sight blocking. So I can move up to it and press the button and gain cover from it later, but I can't deploy next to it, physically touching it at the start of the game, if that makes sense. Okay, so in this scenario, the retreat rules are not applied. I will talk about that more at the end of the video, but I just want to say one thing here. In all of my custom missions that I've ever made, I've always removed the retreat rules. We've had polls about that. There's an overwhelming number of people that prefer this game without the retreat mechanic. And secondarily, for the naysayers who felt like every mission would be turned into just a pure killing the mission, that didn't really happen in any of the events that I run where we've had missions where the retreat mechanic's been removed. We had maybe one or two people sort of, throw up a complaint about it at tops, not that it affected their games at all, but everybody else was fine with it. In fact, majority of people were like, thank you, this is not really a useful mechanic to be added to the game. It just basically creates a sort of gotcha moment for new players occasionally. But we'll come back and talk about why this mission is not really a directly killing them scenario compared to some other missions, or at least not, completely all the way. And we'll do that towards the end of this this commentary. Okay, so let's talk about the AI terminals, which are the consoles. So the two players are fighting for control of them. They're arranged in a grid, and this paragraph here simply is just copy-pasted from a Corvus Belli mission, just showing that when you're setting up your map for this mission, you've got 3 across the center line. They're all 24 inches apart from each other in the, they're 16 inches apart from each other on the sides of the table. And then the row that's closest to you is just 8 inches from the center line. So just your classic comm center grid kind of setup, really easy to remember and to lay the table out for. Cool, and then there's a copy-paste here of how to capture the terminals. So just in case there's any lack of clarity, we're using capture the terminal as the name of the short skill that's used to, control it, to bring it to your side, and controlling the terminal just simply means that you've grabbed it and your opponent hasn't grabbed it back. So this one we talked about over here, the blue player controls it. The red player, if he brings somebody over here and uses the capture terminal skill to turn it into a red console, he now controls it, or she now controls it, and at the moment we have 4-3. So really simple to understand, just the same as any other sort of objective grabbing kind of mission. You might remember that I've occasionally done a custom mission like Tempo War, where you can't take the objective back later on, you just get it. But this is not one of those missions. All of the console's objectives is up for grabs. In fact, I might just quickly relabel this because I've copy-pasted and haven't used AI terminal, so I'll just replace the wording of console with AI terminal just to make that a little bit neater. Otherwise somebody's going to ask, what the hell a console actually is. And here it is here. So, once you get your specialist in base contact with it, you can make a normal whip check. If you fail, obviously you spend a new order, you attempt it again, just like any other button pressing mission. You can use A or B markers, or in our case in TTS, you can tint them. That's probably an easier way of doing it. Either player may attempt to capture a terminal previously captured by the adversary in order to win it back. You can use a different kind of marker or a different kind of tinting. Terminal volume, so they take up a silhouette 3 that blocks line of sight. It says here, it's acceptable for players to use their own customized objective pieces to represent the terminal, but agree to count them as occupying spaces if they were S3, they grant cover as normal. The reason why we have that is because some people like to use just, for example, a little asset like this, where you just got this sitting out in the middle of the table representing your terrain piece. And for the purposes of the mission, we still want to count this as being the same size as that, basically. So that's kind of like how I prefer to make the objectives and the missions a bit cleaner and neater, if that makes sense. Nothing can be deployed in base contact with the S3 areas. We talked about that before. Specialist troops, just the same as any other Corvus Belli mission. There are not going to be bonuses to specific types of specialists to grab the AI thingamajiggies, the AI terminals, but there will be some bonuses we'll talk about later. So, let's come to the part of the mission rules which are new and unique to this particular scenario that make it what it is. So we have the first game mechanic here, and I've called it Encryption. Both players have the ability to set up a trap for each other by locking down one of the AI terminals preemptively. After both players have fully deployed all of their troopers, so that means, you deploy, your opponent deploys, you put down your reserve trooper if any, and your opponent does the same, and then before spending any command tokens or orders or anything like that, this is where you get out your secret information card and you basically make a choice here. So after you've deployed all your troopers, but before the start of the first game round, both players must secretly nominate one of the AI terminals for lockdown and record which one was chosen. This record of this nomination must be revealed to the opponent by the end of the game. So what does that mean? Let's clarify. If I'm the red player, I'm over this side here. And what I might do is I might record this information on a special note card. So I'll go here and grab myself a note card. And let me just edit the text of it. So I'm going to call it lockdown terminal. Cool, so we can see it says that. And then I'm just going to go out and pick which one. So I'd have this in my secret area so my opponent can't see it. And then I look at all of the terminals and I decide which one of these 9 terminals am I going to be locking down. Let's pretend that I choose this one here. So I'm going to choose that one, and I'm going to describe it by going... let's have a look here. I'm going to go lockdown terminal closest to enemy deployment zone on their right, and in brackets on my left. Done. So what that says is this. I've locked down the terminal closest to the enemy deployment zone on their right. So enemy deployment zone on their right means this one, and if we're looking from the red side, it's our left. So we've recorded accurately that secret information. I can just leave this card out here for the remainder of the game. And where the mission says, this record of this nomination must be revealed to the opponent by the end of the game, it's basically just saying that you have to, verify it for your opponent and tell them, which one you secretly recorded, even if they don't actually run into that particular terminal later on. So after all of the orders are spent and you're about to add up the score, that's when I can flip over this card and say to my opponent, hey, by the way, I locked down the terminal closest to your deployment zone on your right, and that's the one on my left. So locking it down, what does that do? If a player successfully uses the capture terminal short skill by passing the willpower check to complete the capture, the adversary must inform that player as to whether it was nominated for lockdown or not. So let's imagine over here that our opponent is going for this one. They haven't actually controlled it yet, so it's marked grey. They move up to it and they fail the willpower check. Well, nothing happens there. We don't have to tell them if it was locked down or not. But if they then try again and they pass it and they capture it, and they're going to color it blue, we have to tell them whether or not it was locked down. And because we chose this one here, we simply said, you have not captured an AI terminal that was locked down. Carry on. Feel free to continue. But if they come over to this one and they spend the order, they pass the willpower check, we have to tell them that that was a lockdown one, and I might just tint that black after that happens. So if they fail to capture it, nothing happens, we don't have to tell them anything, but if they pass the willpower check and they are about to tint it blue, we can say, aha, that one was locked down, you can't have it, it's going to be marked black now. So let's see what the text says for that. So, if you pass the willpower check to complete the capture, your opponent must tell you whether it was or not. If it wasn't, nothing happens, you get the terminal. But if it was nominated, the active player automatically fails the capture attempt and forfeits the order used in the process. Any future attempts will also automatically fail unless the override condition is achieved, which we'll talk about in a minute. So let's just quickly look at this again. So if I just grab a sample model here, and we've got our Bag Maori person, and let's say we've got a bunch of orders for the Pano player, right? So Pano player is over here, and the terminal basically hasn't been touched yet at all during this game. So we go like this. Pano player flips over one of their orders like that, declares the short skill, moves up to it, there are no AROs, then the Pano player is attempting to grab the console or grab the AI terminal, rolls the dice. Let's say they fail it. Let's say they just get like a 3, well, that's a fail. That's a 14 right there. We still don't have to tell them. They've wasted an order. We still don't have to tell them it's been locked down. If they spend another order and they roll like a 3 and they pass and they're about to click it, we have to tell them, oh, that one's locked down. So we've actually caused them to waste 2 orders doing that. So that is the power of encryption. You can choose a console here, and there are a couple of different strategies for it. We'll talk about the actual strategies in a minute. The thing is, though, there is an override condition which says, if a player has successfully captured or controlled 8 out of the 9 possible AI terminals, leaving only the lockdown terminal remaining, then the above encryption rule will not apply, and the player may attempt to capture the final terminal normally. So how would that work? The Pano player over here just tries to get that one and can't get it, but over the course of the game, they're spreading out and they've got their troops in really great positions, and somehow they manage to grab that one, and they grab this one, and in fact, let's just select all of these. So 1, 2, 3, and they somehow get troops over there, and they just blow me away, and they've got all of those. And the very last order of the game, or whatever it might be, they are then allowed to go back to this one, roll the dice, and try and grab it again, and they will be allowed to tint it blue. So that is the only way you can get the 9th one that's been locked down by your opponent. And of course, if you've got all 9 of them, then you'll definitely have more than your opponent does, and that is how you will get 10 objective points in this mission. It's very difficult, but it's possible. We've also got a clause here which says, please note that if one player nominates a terminal for lockdown, only their opponent is affected. They may still attempt to capture it themselves, unless, of course, both players nominated the same terminal coincidentally. So, for example, let's go back to this one and say that it was locked down, and the Pano guy just hasn't managed to capture it at all. That doesn't stop the Caliban over here from the Combined Army player coming around and grabbing it. Just because the Combined Army player locked it down for their opponent doesn't mean it's locked down for them. They are still able to go and grab it themselves, right? The only exception to that is a situation where, let's say, this middle objective was nominated by the Combined Army player for encryption lockdown, and the Pano guy secretly nominated it as well, then neither of them can grab it. In fact, neither player is going to be able to grab it, and the thing is, if the Combined Army player goes to it first and finds out that it was locked down by the opponent's still not going to know if it was locked down by the Combined Army player. It's only once they both have a go at it that they'll realize that. So that's how that works. Some games, both players may lock down the same one. That might not come up very much, but if it does, neither player can get it until one player has basically got all of the other 8 objectives, which is quite unlikely. So that's what that means. Now, there is another mechanic over here which is extremely simple to understand. It is called machine learning. It says, as the players fight for dominance over the AI terminals, the local AI who resides in the network slowly begins to take measures to make it harder and harder for the outside interference to take place. During the first game round, all attempts to execute the capture terminal short skill benefit from a +3 mod. During the second game round, this benefit no longer applies, and during the third game round, you actually have a -3 mod to get it. So, you can sort of see how that would come into play. Let's say Combined Army guy is going first. This Caliban is willpower 13, so if the Caliban's moving and actually pressing buttons and picking up the AI terminals to capture them, every attempt will be on a 16, which means that it's going to be quite order efficient. It's going to be fairly easy to grab the nearby terminals very quickly if you're focusing on that in the early game. However, if we're spending the first part of the game just shooting our opponent and not bothering with the terminals, then as we're moving the Caliban around later in the third turn, we are going to be at -3, and we're only going to be hitting on 10s, 50-50 chance of grabbing the terminal. We may be wasting a lot of orders moving between the terminals and attempting to press them, and it's going to be even worse if our opponent has locked down the one of the ones that we're trying to get at the end game. Of course, in turn 2, the middle of the game, it's just back to normal willpower. But you can kind of see the dynamic here, can't you? So the idea is that normally in missions like this, like when we used to play Comm Center and similar missions, the tactic usually was not to really bother with pressing the buttons on the terminals earlier part of the game, because First of all, your opponent could just grab them back later, and you are kind of just making, just wasting your orders there. And secondarily, you've still got time at the end of the game to press the buttons. And thirdly, you want to try and get map control. You kind of want to try and bust your opponent up. But with this particular mechanic, you first of all got to worry about how efficient you're going to be in the late game pressing buttons if you've lost some specialists and you're trying to move around the board and you're at a -3 to press the buttons. That kind of punishes the strategy a little bit of leaving hidden deployment guys out in the middle of the table, just jumping on objectives and trying to swing them back because of that penalty. Whereas you do get a bonus if you do a little bit of button pressing first at the outset of the game, which means that we're probably going to have games of infinity where players are basically using the first game round not so much to just alpha strike and thrash their opponents, but to try and pick up at least 1 or 2 consoles, get their troops into better positions, make it harder for their enemy to grab their own AI terminals. And there'll be a bit more of a power dynamic that way. There'll be a bit more positional sort of play, and it will be a little bit more balanced, in my opinion, which I think is really, really cool. With the encryption thing, there are a couple of basic strategies, and the other thing I like about it here is that the strategy isn't necessarily 100% obvious. So let's say the Pano player in this case, over the blue side, they are trying to work out which one they want to lock down. A very obvious one to lock down would be this one right here. The reason for that is because it's the easiest one for the combined army player to get to first. It's possible for this Caliban to deploy here and just move over and touch it without being seen by any arrows from that deployment zone, right? If we go for this one, there might be something sneaky over in this building over here or something like that. And if we go to this one, well, there's actually a pretty long line of fire down from there. So the Pano player is banking on the fact that they just want to get as much out of the encryption rule as possible. They're making us basically run into it straight away and at least get some use out of the denial aspect of the encryption side of things. So it may happen that both players simply pick a terminal nearest to their opponent for this and just let it happen. There is another strategy, however. Another strategy is for the AI, so the opponent to actually grab one of the middle ones, like this, for example. So let's say this one's the one locked down. What this means is that the combined army player is just going to go over to the objectives nearby to grab them first, because they're the easier ones to get. And at the start of the game, he's getting +3, so that makes things a lot easier. But later in the game, when, the combined army player actually has to start taking risks, put material out in harm's way, move into hacking areas or things like that, and suffering the negative mod perhaps of grabbing the terminal, if they come out to it and they have to spend an order moving there, an order killing something, an order maybe failing the check because they're at -3, and then they find out that it's the encrypted terminal, the Pano player has actually done really well here, because the Pano player has just wasted so much of the turn of resources on the combined army player doing that, and the combined army player obviously has really committed to that play and has really been punished for it. Whereas if the combined army player spends a single order moving over here, hitting this on a 16, finds out that it's encrypted, well, now they know, and they can just freely go and actually spend their resources a bit more wisely and more efficiently, knowing that they're never going to be able to get this terminal. So you can see a couple of reasons why you might want to go for the middle one, or one of the ones on the side of the middle, or whether you might want to go for one of the ones on your opponent's deployment zone. You could even be super sneaky and pick one of the ones closest to you, but that's just a much riskier strategy. So I like the encryption thing because it's not necessarily a no-brainer. It gives a bit more player agency back. It's a skillful kind of thing. It's a bit like the unmasking mechanic of picking the real HVT decoy. And this should really generate some games where people are thinking a bit more and making calculated plays, and for the overall strategy to not purely just be about luck and the face-to-face rolls of bashing your opponent. So let's come back to the thought here that some people might think of this as a pure, just kill your opponent kind of mission. I disagree with that. Even though retreat's not there and it's the kind of mission where you could just blow up your opponent and press some of the buttons, if you really think that's true, you're going to have to also think that's true about so many other missions out there, whether it's supplies or acquisition or some of my ones like Tempo War and Oblique Assault. But we've seen time and time again that people playing these missions at a reasonable level, when both players are of even skill, it's actually quite easy to shut down somebody else's Alpha Strike. So long as you deploy guys in total cover, you've got some stuff in camo, some stuff not on the table, you've got a couple of solid aero pieces, you've got a couple of throwaway warbands, it's really hard for an opponent just to completely wipe you out. It just doesn't happen very much in an Infinity. And if they commit to that in their turn 1 and get nothing done, you can counterattack, just pick off a couple of things they left out of position, grab 1 or 2 consoles, you're way ahead on the board in terms of points. And the game actually really favors you from there on out, because if they take the foot off the brakes and just start hitting consoles, well, they no longer get the bonus, and then it swings back to you and you can get more consoles, and it works kind of like that. Another thing I really like about this mission is that, in the early game, it's fairly relaxed, you can grab the stuff on your side, but the action is still forced by the fact that you're still going to be fighting over these middle terminals, right? So going second is still a really good choice, but hey, going first is also a really good choice to get your models into better positions. Picking deployment is also a really big deal, because you might actually like the fire lanes towards some of these terminals better than what you get on the other side. That is a really big deal as well. Just because I'm going to put my money where my mouth is, and I really feel like this is not a mission where, it's any more about killing the opponent than any other mission is. I've put these large buildings in the middle just to make it kind of punishing for, somebody moving a Dalfei through here and shooting guys in the enemy deployment zone. You've got to be very careful about surviving an Alpha Strike. But hey, you still have the opportunity to put hackers out here and crazy koalas, mad traps, that kind of thing. There's definitely counterplay. So I want to hear from you guys after you've playtested this mission at least a couple of times. I'm not really interested in any kind of feedback from people who just read the mission and go, oh, okay, it's this or it's that. I want to more or less hear about, serious problems based on reoccurring themes from several games over, not just one person, but a group of people's feedback. That is what would get me to sort of change my mind about how missions like this work. But I'm feeling really positive about it. We'll give this a go, and in my next TTS event, there will probably be either this mission, verbatim, or a similar version of it, because I think it's pretty good. Hope you guys enjoy.